Chapter 39. Old Wong, you are listening at Novel Full. Audio. In the end, the four of them ended up buying holographic lenses. Alan, Rachna, and Nix picked contacts that were made in such a way that it would literally become a part of their eyes, they wouldn't even need to take them out. On the other hand, Flavia decided to go with glasses, which gave a certain boost to her teacher aura. After that particular shop, Rachna stopped at a few other shops. He bought things such as blankets, lighters, food, all sorts of tools, spare clothes, and a few secondary weapons. Compared to the holographic lenses, these weren't very expensive. So, after an hour of shopping, he only spent around 800 thalis in total. He obviously put his new possessions inside his spatial ring. Or else he wouldn't have bothered, he didn't want to buy things he'd have to carry around 24/7. Then, the group finally came to a stop as they found a small noodle stall ran by an old bearded dwarf. Other than Pronos, they hadn't eaten that much at the buffet, so they decided to give it a try. After paying 10 thalis each through a system window, their bowls were quickly served. "Fuck, this is good," Alan uttered as he slurped the long string. "Totally new flavors too. Never tasted a sauce like this." "Indeed," Nix nodded. Her table manners were flawless compared to the three others. "Although I have eaten many luxurious dishes in my life, I have to say, this is delicious. There is something about simple but well-made dishes that just never gets old," Flavia said. Rachna hummed in agreement while eating. Even after eating an entire chicken, he still felt like he could eat 10 times more. "I'm happy you like it," the old dwarf said with a smile. His stall was located in a pretty quiet area and currently, his only customers were the four in front of him. This was one of the best parts of having a street stall for the old dwarf. Since he had just a few customers at a time, he could always chat with them about the food. "Say, old man, what can you tell us about this city?" "We're kinda new here," Alan said. "Oh, so you four are new hosts, huh?" he said with a nod. "Let's see. First, this city is very old. It's as old as the plateau, in fact. The very first hosts thousands of years ago made the foundations for it, and it evolved until this point. It became a massive hotspot over the years. There are a lot of people living here and the traffic makes business boom. This is the second biggest city across every plateau, but I can assure you that we're the most technologically advanced. I have been wondering until now, but how big are we talking about?" Nix asked. "Even while we were standing on those elevated platforms, we couldn't see the end of the cityscape." The old dwarf laughed lightly. "Of course. If you want to see it, you would need to travel hundreds of miles in one single direction. But you can take the underground train for that. You will get there eventually, since every new host needs to go out into the wilderness to ascend plateaus." "Oh." Rachna's interest was piqued. "So, there is something out there that we will need." The old man chuckled. "Sorry, Sonny. I can't reveal too much. You will be filled in at the pavilion." "Sir, do you mind if I ask a more personal question?" Flavia was the next one to inquire something, and the dwarf looked at her. "Though, I have to admit I'm not aware if it's something normal to ask or not." "What is it, young lady? Are you a host?" The dwarf first blinked then laughed. "Ha ha ha, no. No, I'm afraid not. I'm one of the locals. I've met some hosts who called us NPCs, if that helps you." Rachna snorted. "Those are probably dead by now or had a very rough awakening. Why would you say that?" The dwarf asked confusedly. NPC is the abbreviation for non-player character. It's game jargon. In other words, those people you met were taking you as nothing more than a game feature. Those are signs of foolishness and self-pretense, Rachna replied. "I see. That explains a few things," the dwarf said with a nod. "I was never told what it meant until now. I'm confused though. Anyone with a functioning brain should be able to tell this isn't some stupid kid game. I wonder how people can get that delusional sometimes. Alan shook his head. Now, youth can often be a bit misled. Nothing we can blame them for. Younglings like you are rarer if you ask me. And, maybe, it's because of this, he said and snapped his fingers. Instantly, a window appeared in front of the group's eyes. Old Wang, the noodle store owner, offers you a quest. Objective. Finish eating your meal. Rewards. 5 experience points. Do you accept? Yes/no. Nice. So, you can give quests to hosts, huh? Alan unhesitatingly accepted the quest. It was free experience after all. This is probably why even the weaker locals are left alone by hosts, Old Wang added. We are not really mistreated since each one of us is in essence a good opportunity to get rewards. Wait, there are no rules to the quests you give. For this one, you're giving us experience points for just eating. You must have a limitation of some sort, right? Old Wang nodded. You're right. First of all, I can't give quests more than once a week. Secondly, the rewards must be provided by me. Even experience points. Like you, we locals have a system. Though it's very minimal in comparison. The only thing we have access to is our level. We have absolutely no control over our attributes and skills, and the only way for us to get stronger is through pure training. So, wait, you're giving us your own EXP right now? Alan was surprised. Are you sure it's fine? Don't worry, Sonny. I can get that amount back easily. Even if I'm a bit lacking, I can still beat up a few monsters, and even small things like making use of your proficiencies can give you EXP. For example, if I invent a new dish with my cooking proficiency, I will get rewarded with a nice amount of experience. You can get the same result by coming up with new battle moves too. Cool. Thanks for the info, old man. Meanwhile, Ragna had silently cast an appraisal on the old man and was forced to hide the shock he felt. Name. Wang Feizi. Age. 96 level. 123 race. Dwarf affiliation. First plateau titles. The noodle store owner, the hidden master blacksmith. Attributes. Strength. 50 endurance. 30 speed. 10 dexterity. 70 intelligence. 30 luck. 2 proficiencies. Blacksmithing, LV.29, hammer, mastery, LV.12, cooking, LV.X, mana control, LV.X, magic skills. Metal magic, LV.Max, unique or racial traits. Hypersensitivity to mechanical movements. Hyper-affinity to metalworking. Note. Wang Feizi is the last living member of a lost dwarven clan. He has stayed hidden from the world for the most part of his life, training in his blacksmithing skills. He also has a passion for cooking and uses it as a distraction when he needs inspiration for his forging. Inwardly, Ragna only had one reaction: how in the flying fuck is this lacking? The old man's status was way beyond their current selves. He even had one ascended skill and one demi-god skill on the verge of reaching its limit. Ragna stared at the old dwarf from the corner of his eyes. He seemed to be completely oblivious of the appraisal that had been cast on him. Ragna's suspicions were quickly answered by Alexa, who saw fit to intervene. Locals cannot sense analysis skills without the use of a special item, skill, or magic ability. They generally have a small resistance against them as well. That is why you were able to see much information even with your level disparity. I see. Also, may I add something, Ragna? I believe I already answered that question. What do you want to say? I suggest you keep a connection to this local. Blacksmiths are very significant to a lot of people. This dwarf will most likely be able to reach divine rank if given the time. Even high-level hosts would wish to be acquainted with such a master. I'll keep that in mind. Thanks for the tip, Alexa. You're welcome, Rachna. Oh yeah, I was thinking, Teach, you got the Soul Hunter title, right? What does it do? Rachna perked up. He didn't know how the conversation had evolved to that point, but he also was curious. How to explain, Flavia mused. Essentially, it gives me a sort of mana bank. The bank is equal to 10% of my mana pool, and for every enemy that I kill, one soul will turn into one stored mana point. The best thing about it is that I can use it as a substitute source of energy for my telekinesis. It even says that it can replace stamina when it comes to it. Damn, that's good. What about yours? Rachna followed. The crowned seedling title. Well, mine is simple in comparison. It gives me 2 volatile attribute points. At least, that's what they called it. From what I understood, I can affect those points wherever and whenever I want. What do you mean? I believe he's talking about attribute points that can be unassigned at will to be put into other attributes instead, Old Wong answered. I remember hearing about it in passing. That's a very good effect actually, Nix commented. You could take someone by surprise if you use it well. That could also very well save your life if you concentrate them on something like speed or endurance. True. I didn't think of it like that, Alan shrugged. After 10 more minutes of idle chatter, the group finished their meal and Old Wong's quest updated instantly and gave them 5 experience each. See you, old man. It was fun, Alan said as he stood up with everyone else. Anytime, Sonny. Do you have an HL number perhaps? Rachna then asked. HL was the common abbreviation people used for the holographic lenses. Yes, of course. I can give you my number. Let's keep in touch. I have a feeling that you 4 will do great things in the future, Old Wong said with a smile, and before they knew it, their lenses were already registering a number coming from an external source. Save it under Old Wong, Rachna said inwardly to Alexa, who was the one who handled the HL. It seemed that the system AIs had a lot more uses than he anticipated. We'll come back once in a while, Rachna said. It might be good to have a place to relax in the first plateau. As long as we don't die, that is. Old Wong laughed. Indeed. This is probably something that the system will tell you enough that you'll get sick of it, but, I'll say it anyway, survive well, kiddos. Rachna waved his hand over his shoulder as he walked away with the other 3. When they were out of sight, Old Wong chuckled and closed his stall's counter before exiting it. The second he put a foot outside of it, the entire stall disappeared. Phew, he sighed while tapping his back. Another day that passes, he muttered, then looked at the night sky for a moment. I'm in a good mood this evening. Maybe I'll forge a few blades then go to bed, he chuckled and went back home. Chapter 40. To Yearn for the Stars. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After eating their meal at Old Wong's, Rachna asked for directions from Alexa and she led them to the closest hotel. It was one of the more imposing buildings in the city. When they went through the entrance, they were welcomed by a clerk who, after asking for their IDs, offered them each a free room because they were new to the system. After taking an elevator that Rachna was sure had somehow moved them across a distance that was considerably higher than the building's height he saw from the outside, the 4 of them found their rooms at the very end of the corridor. Well, I guess we'll split up for the night, Rachna commented as he opened the door to his room with a card they had been given. When the door opened, Pronos instantly dashed inside, curious to see how it looked. At what time should we gather tomorrow? Nix asked. It's almost midnight right now. To get a good rest, let's say we get out at 9, Rachna said. Also, here, he added and waved his hand at them. Several sets of clothes came out of his ring and appeared in his friend's arms. He hadn't been the only one to buy clothes, and since he was conveniently able to store anything in his ring, he had been the one to carry them. All right, see you in the morning, Alan said and entered his room. Good night, peeps. Good night, Nix followed up and closed her door after entering. Good night, Rachna, Flavia said softly and did the same as the two others. Rachna was the last one to close his door, which was followed by a loud shattering noise coming from inside the room. He distanced himself from the entrance and found himself looking at a queen-sized bed placed in a room that had one entire wall made of glass so that you could look at the night city. Now, the second thing that he noticed was Pronos frozen still on top of a nightstand. His mouth was wide open and, on the floor, laid a broken vase spilling water over the carpet. Rachna sent a blank look at him and the little snake turned away and quite literally tried to whistle his way out of it. Rachna sighed and walked to a certain door which he believed was some sort of bathroom. When he opened the door, the lights turned on automatically and his assumptions were proven right. He inspected the shower, the toilet, and the sink before looking through the small shelves. He grabbed one of the many towels there were and used it to get rid of the water while Pronos watched awkwardly. Then, after throwing away the ceramic shards along with the plant and the dirt it was planted in, Rachna lied down on the bed. He stared at the ceiling for a while, before sitting up. He looked at Pronos, who was continuously sending feelings of shame and guilt through their connection. Don't worry, little guy. I'm not mad. I just hope you don't knock over a vase someday where our life might depend on it, okay? Pronos nodded frantically and Rachna snorted before focusing on one certain system window that he mentally made reappear. It was the prompt that told him of the unlocked features. He planned to follow Gray's advice. Alexa, you're there. Of course. Then let's start. The pavilion is something I'd like to ask about, but we'll probably learn tomorrow, so let's skip it. Explain what the macro translation is. Macro translation is something necessary for a host's life inside the system. It allows for people to be able to converse even if they speak different languages. To put matters simply, this feature of the system makes it so that everyone in the system speaks a common language. However, this doesn't include written forms. I see. Good to know. What about the ranking? Ranking is exactly as Gray Whistles told you earlier. The higher your rank is, the more influence you have in the system, over both fellow hosts, locals, and the system itself. How do you increase it? Rachna continued his questioning as he leaned against the bedstand and Pronos did the same on a pillow, quietly listening. To be promoted, one needs to fulfill a few conditions. One of the most common conditions would be how high your level is. I believe it would better if you see for yourself, Rachna, Alexa stated, and a system window opened in front of him. Rank I promotion conditions. Level 10, attribute cap greater than 40, 10 completed quests. 1 out of 10, 50 monsters above level 8 killed. 6/50ths. Straightforward enough, Rachna commented. What do I gain from promoting? Other than prestige and higher authority, more practical rewards such as attribute points and items are possible. Keep in mind that promoting gets harder the more you do so and the rewards become proportionally better. Alright, tell me about looting. It refers to what humans from your planet would call drops. When defeating a monster or even a hostile host, they have a chance to drop valuables such as money and equipment. Dungeons, Rachna didn't waste time and asked for the next feature. It is explicit. On every plateau, there will be a sizable number of dungeons. Clearing them is a means to train, collect good equipment, and sometimes complete a quest. Then, tell me about quests now. Of course. Quests, as you saw, can be given by locals such as Wang Feizi. Their objective can vary from the simplest of actions to the rescuing of a princess. If Rachna didn't know better, he would have thought that Alexa tried to tell a joke. Quests have 3 possible sources in total. 1. Locals. 2. Exploration. This includes things such as discovering lost ruins, dungeons, or even just a simple lost item that you would be tasked to return to their owner. 3. Path quests. Your path will make you go through ordeals in the future to master your abilities. Rachna scowled at the last one. He wondered what kind of quest his path could give him. What sort of test would a nine-tailed werewolf be required to go through? Then, we have parties, Alexa continued on the list, probably having learned by now that her host would ask it without waiting. Parties are a very simple idea. A party can be created when several hosts form a group to either conquer dungeons or complete quests. The party cannot have more than 10 members, and any experience gained by any of them will be shared with the others at half value. On the same idea, there exists guilds. I'm sure you understand the gist of it already. Grey Whistles will explain more to you tomorrow. Finally, the last feature accessible to you through the system are trials. There is a definite number of trials on each plateau, and they are also the conditions required to move from one plateau to another. The first plateau has exactly 3 trials. Only by completing them all will you be allowed to access the second plateau. More details will be given to you at the pavilion. Ragnar rubbed the bridge of his nose with a grunt. It sounds like this pavilion is a major aspect of the system. That is correct. He sighed and took a look at Pronos, who had fallen asleep in the middle of Alexa's explanation. He then glanced at the time on a digital clock hanging from the wall of the room and idly noted that there were only a few seconds before midnight. That point would have been passed as utterly meaningless if it wasn't for the fact that the very second the 11.59.59 turned into midnight, the lights of the city suddenly shut down as if a blackout had occurred. Even the light of his room was forcefully turned off. Ragnar looked through the window with a slightly stunned expression. His eyes dilated a bit as he began to see the stars that should have normally never been observable in such a rural area, one that was terribly futuristic on top of that. Alexa, is this a normal occurrence? Affirmative. This city, baptized Dark Steel, has been conceived so that every light strong enough to hide the stars would be turned off at midnight without exception. Remarkable, Ragnar nodded before closing his eyes, ready to sleep. Every city should implement something like this. My old man would love it. Your uncle? Alexa asked. Ragnar clearly heard the curiosity in her tone. Yes. He liked star-gazing and he would complain about city lights every now and then, he replied oddly softly. And, I guess his interest got transferred to me. Though I have to admit, I used to do it even more than he did, he admitted and opened one eye to look at the window again. If I could, I would stay up all night, observing the night sky. Alexa was once again having alien thoughts. Her host wasn't talking in the indifferent way he was used to. No, she would go as far as to say that it was warm. That's why she became curious. For some reason, she wanted to know the reason behind this change. Can I ask why you enjoy star-gazing so much? Stars are beacons. They shine brightly from within the bleakest of places. Isolated, surrounded by darkness, no life, no air, no sound. But they're still there and they burn so vividly that we are compelled to view them. In the end, I guess you could say that I admire that aspect. You could also say that I yearn to be one of those stars, he concluded and closed his eyes again. This time, Alexa knew that he wouldn't be saying anything else. As a matter of fact, he had by some strange manner managed to consciously shut down his mind. One couldn't call that sleeping. Perhaps it would be more accurate to call it meditation, Alexa considered. A deep meditation that allows both the body and brain to rest. Is this a byproduct of his eyes of the soul? Alexa was left alone with her musing. Something she noticed had been happening more and more ever since she had become her host's AI. Discarding these thoughts, Alexa followed the example and made her awareness shut down until her host woke up. Chapter 41. Soul Core. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ragnar's eyes snapped open right when the clock displayed exactly August 30th, 2000, as if his body had been programmed to do so. Which, in fact, wasn't that far from the truth. His internal clock was adjusted through years of training. If he decided to only sleep for 8 hours, he would not sleep a second more or less. While conscious, he was able to keep track of time for at least 24 hours without seeing a single timepiece. He grunted and got out of bed while Pronos was still peacefully sleeping on the pillow. He loosened up his shoulder and went to the bathroom. He took out the clothes he had got himself and took a shower before wearing them. They were composed of black jeans loose enough to not bother him when moving, a silver belt, a black and red shirt, sports shoes, and a leather jacket to finish. Ragnar let the water flow in the sink and rinsed his face with it. He looked at the mirror with a blank expression and he couldn't help but immediately focus on his wolf ears. "I will have to get used to this," he muttered and glanced at the magic necklace he had placed to the side. He wondered if he still should hide his features or even if it was any useful considering most of the people he would want to hide from would be able to see through it with a glance. He shrugged and ultimately put Ulvia's veil around his neck but didn't activate the illusion. The item itself added 5 to his senses and he wouldn't want to pass on that. He stifled a yawn and took a look at the time. He still had 10 minutes before their agreed time. He pulled out a cigarette from obsidian smoke and lit it as he walked toward the CE.through wall of his room. He stood silently as he observed the city outside. With the morning sunlight, this landscape had another feeling to it. He squinted his eyes and while channeling both his soul and mana, triggered his fabled sight. From what happened to him when he learned how to fly, his eyes of the soul could somewhat be used as an active skill to boost his instinct to a completely different level. It would change from something that allowed him to grasp most things with ease, to something that made him one with the action itself. Then, there was mana. He was sure that he could use that energy in the same way. So, as his eyes glowed with a golden hue, he was pleasantly amazed as he heard 3 bell-like sounds that announced the appearance of 3 prompts. Eyes of the soul has leveled up. Mana control has leveled up. Fabled sight has leveled up. You have found out how to channel your mana to different parts of your body. You have learned a new skill, reinforcement. Reinforcement, LV.1. Any combatant that respects themselves must learn this skill. It is not considered magic as it merely represents the manipulation of internal energy without attribute molding. Statistics other than stamina, MP regen, and ATR cap can be increased when the skill is active. The skill can be concentrated on one particular stat to maximize the effects. Minimum cost: 3 MP and 3 stamina per min. You have found out how to channel your soul to heighten your perception of the world. You have attained a spiritual skill, Soul Core. Soul Core, LV.1. One who is a step into the spiritual world. By getting closer to your soul, you have developed a spiritual organ. Whenever you perform an action of any sort, skills included, your core will guide your very soul to support you. Additional effects: plus 100% senses, 0.1% mana and stamina consumption. There was one thing Ragnar hadn't been prepared for, and that was the moment the second new skill took effect. Last time, it had been uncomfortable and mildly painful. But this time, after having his senses doubled again, his brain almost stopped functioning right then and there. His breathing stopped and he lost control over his body as he helplessly collapsed on the floor. His eyes started switching back and forth from purple to red without stopping. Ragnar! The trickster's sleeve! Alexa suddenly shouted. Ragnar growled and his fangs grew a bit longer. He opened his mouth and struggled as he spoke 3 words, 2 of hearts. A card instantly materialized above him and surrounded him with warm light. He then gasped as the air returned to his lungs. At the same time, his brain finally got the oxygen it needed and he hastily sat up while panting. Under his mask of forced serenity, Ragnar almost felt scared of what just happened. What had just happened wasn't just mere pain. No, pain would have been 1,000 times better than what he had just experienced. It was as if his mind, soul, mana, and even body were about to explode. SSSSS, a hissing sound reached his ears and he winced as he tried to cover his ears at how loud it was to him. He glanced at his left to see Pronos looking at him in both confusion and worry. He seemed to have just woken up, or he might have freaked out if he had seen Rachna paralyzed on the ground. Well, he paused and took a deep breath before continuing. Trying his best to control his senses and make it so that his eardrums wouldn't be hurt by the sound of his own voice. "Good morning, little guy. You want to know what I just found out?" Pronos tilted his head in wonder. "Large increases to stats and attributes appear to be extremely fatal if you're not careful with it," he said, and slowly stood up. He saw his extinguished cigarette lying on the floor and groaned. "I even had to use another trickster card so soon," he muttered. "Still, thanks for the heads up, Alexa. I owe you one." "It's no problem. I'm here to assist." Rachna snorted. "At least, I'm lucky that the lowest card rank was enough to help me. It will be back by tomorrow." Now, after getting his breathing to a perfectly normal state and flexing his sore muscles, he looked out of the window again while his fabled sight was still active. He almost fell again when his vision zoomed on the first thing that he saw, a flying car passing by at high speed. He even saw the small details about the driver's appearance. Fabled sight has leveled up. Before he was struck by another fit of overperception, Rachna decided to disengage the skill. He had learned his lesson. If he wanted to experiment with his soul, among other things, he had to make sure he wouldn't get killed in the process. Or at least, he would have to prepare a healing measure each time. Rachna looked at the clock and it was time for his group to assemble. He gestured to Pronos, who seemingly was in the middle of a yawn, and the little snake jumped on his shoulder right away. After that, he passed by the bathroom to splash his face with water again and wipe the sweat away. When he finally came out of his room, he saw Nyx leaning against the wall with her eyes closed, wearing a casual black dress with red accents. When Rachna came out, she opened her eyes to look at him. "Your mana flow is hectic," she uttered. "Were you training?" "You could say that," Rachna nodded, and he mimicked her, waiting for Alan and Flavia. "I wanted to experiment something. I think I almost killed myself in the process, but the results were worth the fright." Nyx's eyes widened a bit. She looked at him with a scowl. "I see. Try not to do that in the future. It might cripple you." "I'll keep that in mind," Rachna replied evenly, and the hallway turned silent. A minute later, this silence was broken by the sound of a door opening. Flavia came out of her room and smiled when she saw them. She wore a white shirt and a gray long skirt. "Good morning, you two. Have you been waiting for long?" "No, barely a few minutes," Nyx responded. However, she added, and turned toward the door of the room belonging to their common lazy friend. Flavia sighed. "Yes. I'm afraid this might take some time." Rachna closed his eyes with a sigh. "Alexa, call Alan's HL. And if you can, make the tone ring as loud as possible." "Understood." 2 seconds later, they heard a short scream followed by a loud thud. Flavia giggled. "Looks like someone fell off their bed." Nyx smiled as well, and Rachna then told Alexa to hand up the call. It had done its job. 5 minutes later, a sleepy Alan opened his door with an equally weary glare. "God damn it, I wish mornings didn't exist," he grumbled as he walked out of his room with a coat hanging from his shoulder. He sported black cargo pants and a sleeveless shirt. "I'm sure you do," Rachna quipped dully and started heading toward the elevator. "Let's go." A few minutes later, the group was leaving the hotel and entering the lively streets of Dark Steel again. The day ambience was different from the night one, contrasted by a vastly lower number of passers-by and a clean atmosphere caused by the fresh air of the morning. The pavilion is hard to miss. It is the oval dot-shaped building that you can see sticking out between skyscrapers to the north. At normal walking speed, there is about 30 minutes worth of distance from here to there. Alexa answered the obvious question the second they came out. "Well, I guess we're walking again," Alan said as the four of them walked on the pavement. "Hey, Rach, I was wondering. You're not going to hide your tails and ears anymore. There is no point. So, no. At least, for the current circumstances. People at the level of overseers can easily notice low-grade illusions, after all, Nyx remarked. Ragnar nodded, and as he was idly observing his surroundings like a tourist, he suddenly stopped moving as his wolf ears twitched. Which, once again, made Flavia grab her own hand to stop it from reaching for them. Alan noticed with a snort that even Nyx's hand had contracted. Lucky bastard, he said inwardly before asking, why were you stopping? Give me a second, Ragnar replied and closed his eyes. His senses were picking up something quite strange. He was sure he heard the screams of a little girl for the split of a second, but the noise of the airborne cars quickly drowned it. At the same time, he briefly felt a wave of intent. His sense of smell also picked up something that tasted foul. It was like negative intent, he muttered to himself, much to his companion's confusion. What they couldn't know was that Ragnar's sensory stat had already gone above 200. It had become possible for him to detect things such as malice from a distance now, on top of having very strong sight, hearing, and smell. But he couldn't tell where that intent came from precisely. That's when he got an idea. He raised his hand, palm facing the sky. Call of Fangs, he whispered, and, at the cost of 1 mana, a very small shadow wolf pup appeared in his hand, which happily barked at him. Can you locate the source of that intent? Ragnar asked simply, and the pup jumped off his hand and ran off into one of the alleys to their right. What are you doing, if I may ask? Nyx raised an eyebrow. I'm not sure yet. Could you go on ahead without me? I have to check something. Don't worry, I'll catch up to you. I should be able to smell your trace, he said, and ran off after his shadow pup. The heck just happened? Alan uttered. Flavia shrugged. It's just Ragnar being Ragnar. He's too elusive for our mortal minds, she jested. True. Though, did he just say, I should be able to smell your trace? Alan grimaced. Damn, that's weird. What do you think I smell like? Nyx and Flavia blinked and shared a look before continuing to walk, ignoring his question. Hey! He shouted as he followed them. I mean, it was rhetorical, but you didn't need to ignore me like that. Chapter 42. Obsidian. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ragnar ran through the narrower alleys of the city in his wolf form as he followed the shadow pup he had summoned. Using Call of Fangs with only 1 MP, made the wolf quite weak and not even capable of using Shadow Meld, but it still had its ability to smell negative energy. Mama! He heard as he entered the shady parts of the city. He was in an alley between buildings so tall that the light of the sun could barely shine through. Ragnar squinted his eyes as he heard the screaming and the crying that followed. He accelerated past the shadow pup and turned to the right at the intersection, where he saw a little girl curled on the ground with bruises on her visible skin and 3 men surrounding her. He could see a pair of folded cat ears on her head as well as a matching tail. Shut your mouth, kid. No one can hear you. One of them shouted. Guile. You sure this brat is worth the trouble? Trust me, we can probably sell her for around 10,000 tollies if we find a good buyer, a second one said as he closed one eye to access his HL. Now, let me make this call so we. Before he could finish, his throat was ripped apart by a clawed shadow. At the same time, a white snake jumped out of nowhere and sunk its fangs in another's neck. What the fuck? The last man paled and tried to grab the futuristic-looking gun on his back while trembling in front of the 9-tailed beast glowering at him with glowing eyes. Before he could even draw his weapon though, he saw something that struck him to the depths of his core. A pair of silver and black wings was reflected in his eyes before rapid projectiles found themselves lodged in every part of his body, taking his life in the split of a second. Ragnar watched with a cold gaze as the man collapsed lifeless with a dozen of black feathers littered across his body, with more than a few having pierced his head. You have killed 2 LV.3 locals, slave dealers. No experience was gained. Rachna emotionlessly acknowledged the notification and walked toward the child whose sobs were muffled and occasionally interrupted by her calling her mother. He cast a quick appraisal on her to get her name and nudged her with his nuzzle. "Liz, you're safe now," he said in the softest tone he could muster. But his words didn't elicit any reaction as he continued to hug herself and calling out her mom. Rachna sighed as Pronos settled around his neck again. He looked at the girl's injuries and groaned as the cooldown of the trickster's sleeve wasn't over yet for him to heal her with it. "I could use a potion, but then again, I don't think it would be the brightest idea to make her drink something at the moment. Alexa, does a healing potion work if it is played externally?" "Affirmative. However, the effectiveness will go down." Well, Rachna pulled out the last potion he had and held it between his fans before opening it with his claws and pouring it on the shivering child. The little girl then felt as if a warm blanket had been put over and the pain gradually vanished as if it was never there. Interestingly enough, the potion left her clothes dry and was absorbed by her skin as the bruises disappeared. She stopped whispering and hesitatingly raised her head to look around her. The first thing she saw was the sharp but non-threatening purple eyes of a wolf. Then, she saw the tails and the wings still there although now folded. "The bad guys are gone, Liz. You can stand up," the wolf spoke to her. She looked at him with red eyes threatening to spill tears again. "I want to see Mama. Liz Tyler extends a quest to you in desperation. Objective: find Liz's mother and reunite them. Rewards: none. Note: Liz has given you a quest intuitively. She doesn't have anything to offer you but the choice is yours. Do you accept? Yes/no." Rachna nodded and accepted, not even bothered in the slightest by the lack of reward. He didn't come here in search of a quest in the first place. "Grab onto me then. I'll help you look for her," he said and carefully lied down next to her after retracting his wings inside his body, something that he still wasn't sure how it worked. She reached for his back whilst trembling, then timidly climbed on his back. When she was done, he stood up and began to leave the area at a relaxed pace as to not harm her or make her fall. At the same time, he was trying to compare her scent to the others his nose was picking up. As he was sniffing the air, a prompt popped up. "Through performing a certain action, you have developed a new skill, tracking. Tracking, LV.1. The ability to detect and recognize traces left by other living beings. The ways people approach this skill differ. But whether it is through hearing, smell, touch, or sight, this skill will allow the user to track down their target." The second that notification arrived, Rachna could already feel the difference the skill made. All of a sudden, the scents he was perceiving were considerably clearer and easier to filter. After a few minutes of silence, with Liz not even daring to say a word, he finally smelled a similar scent while wandering in a small street. People would send him weird looks, but considering how they did nothing to him, he could guess that beings like him were not unseen before on the streets of the city. Though, if the shocked expressions he spotted when they looked at his tails were anything to go by, 9-tailed animals weren't anything common. After another minute, he finally reached his destination and he instantly spotted a cat woman running around, asking strangers if they had seen her daughter. When he got close enough, Liz stirred as her ears twitched. Cats were said to be able to recognize people through the sound of their footsteps. Something that was proven accurate as the little girl straightened and looked over Rachna's head. "Mama!" She shouted and jumped down from his back and ran to the woman in tears. "Liz!" Her mother shouted back with a voice filled with relief, pain, and guilt. She crouched and hugged her mother with all her strength. "Thank God, you're okay." Rachna watched quietly from the side as he heard the completion of the quest. At least, it counted for his promotion conditions. Pronos also watched with a sympathetic expression from under his scarf. "My lord, were you the one who saved my daughter?" The mother turned toward me as she held her daughter in her arms. My lord. Rachna frowned internally. You are a nine-tailed noble in her eyes, Rachna, Alexa explained. Yes, I did. Be more cautious in the future. I won't always be there to save your daughter, he said and turned around as he prepared to leave. My lord, please wait. I need to repay you somehow. No need. I merely just got rid of some human trash. Nothing warranting a reward from the likes of you, he replied, instinctively getting into a persona of an actual noble. He might as well just go along with it. Her eyes widened. Please, at least accept this. Just after these words left her mouth, Rachna was faced with another prompt. Lana Tyla offers you 1,000 tallies for rescuing her daughter. Do you accept the exchange? Yes/no. I know this may be an inconsequential amount for you, but please, take it as my gratitude for saving my daughter, she insisted and Rachna glanced at her before accepting with a sigh. 1,000 tallies have been transferred. After that message, he looked at the mother-daughter pair one last time. I will accept this to give you face. Be sure to protect your family better in the future. Have a good day, he said. However, Lana asked one last question before he could leave. Can I have the honor of knowing my lord's name? Rachna stiffened and scowled at her. Call me Obsidian, he declared before running toward the closest building's wall and running vertically until he left everyone's sight after landing on the roof. After getting to a safe location hidden from prying eyes, Rachna returned to his Therian form and casually walked out from the alleys. He sniffed the air and instantly knew where his three friends were. As he started heading toward them, he thought back to what he had just done. When that feline woman had asked his name, he nearly froze up. He had to admit that he was a bit careless in showing his nine-tailed wolf form like that. But he had been forced to transform in worry that he'd be too slow to intervene in whatever was happening. Well, let's hope that a fake name will be enough to not direct too much attention to me, Rachna muttered to himself. He had no idea at the time that he had just caused something way more than just a diversion. Chapter 43. Pavilion. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After catching up with the three who had gone ahead, Rachna had briefly summarized what he had been doing after they asked him what had taken so long. Slave dealers, huh? Alan muttered darkly. This system seems to be more real than I would have liked. I see what you mean, Flavia nodded. We need to be careful and not just make the assumption that this place doesn't go beyond just hosts and their system. Indeed. Though, this kind of situation will probably not just involve locals. It's a certainty that even hosts might partake in such crimes, Nix added. Rachna stayed silent, but the three of them didn't need him to say anything to know that he agreed if his speech about humans at the party was anything to go by. He was one of the people who knew very well how ugly people could be. Looks like we're here, he changed the topic as they arrived near the pavilion, a massive building with an oval shape and an arched glass rooftop. The walls were carved and seemed to be made of various materials aside from the several rows of tinted glass. The area around the direct boundaries of the building was cleared of any urban structure and the front side was an entire plaza with a fountain in the center. The entrance of the building had at least 5 big revolving doors and a sizable stream of visitors going in and out. Well, this definitely looks like an important place, Alan commented as the group made their way through the plaza and around the fountain. They got to the entrance and then inside without any trouble. They took a moment to admire the hall that they stepped in. It was a circular hall with a very high ceiling. Above them was a sort of giant sophisticated gyroscope that floated in random directions. The walls were constructed with mechanisms resembling gears that were spinning very slowly. The floor seemed to be made out of granite and with 2 different shades. The brighter shade defined paths that led in 3 directions. 2 of them being the extravagant staircases to the sides and the last one leading to an imposing reception counter. Alan whistled and looked around at the people going up and down the stairs with only a few of them heading to the reception. Oddly, there didn't seem to be as many people as he expected after seeing the traffic outside. "Ah, you're here," the recognizable voice of a certain clown made the group look to their left where Gray was approaching them with an ever-so-bright grin. Though, his attire was different. It was not as clowny before. The color scheme remained the same, but his clothes currently were more akin to a business suit. He didn't have the clown nose this time and his cybernetic face had no obstruction. He also wore a red top hat now and a quite eye-catching pocket watch hanging from his tailcoat with a silver chain. "I praise you. You're quite early, all things considered. Many new hosts tend to sleep more due to exhaustion," he commended as he stopped in front of them. "So, did you enjoy your brief exploration of Black Steel?" "Fairly," Rachna responded. "We did enjoy having a small chat over noodles." Gray blinked. "Well, that's quite a cozy thing to do, although you've been pretty much kidnapped and thrown into a perilous world which you have no information about. You're talking to Rak, you know. He could be dying tomorrow and he wouldn't give a shit if he could not do anything about it," Alan commented and the clown cackled. "I see. Anyhow, Rachna Ziora, I'm here to guide you through the pavilion. Your friends should also go meet up with their guild members. Normally, you should be asking the reception where your guild is, but I'll tell you myself as a service," he said and pointed at the staircase on the right of the hall. "To get to the Madness Guild's meeting, it's straight after going up those stairs until you find the room numbered 045. I think they will start the meeting in about 30 minutes. As for the Wiccan Guild's meeting, it's a bit after that. You'll reach an intersection, go to the right and search for the room numbered 077, Gray finished and turned to the three concerned people. "Got it memorized?" "Yeah, no problem," Alan said. "No worry," Nick said and Flavia nodded agreeingly. "Sweet." Gray clapped his hands. "Let's go then, Rachna. My guild doesn't have a room because we knew we would be getting only one member, if any. We can go straight to the left staircase and proceed to the awakening of your magic. I'll explain a few things on the way too." "Sure," Rachna replied. "Though, I trust I'll be able to regroup with my friends over here, right?" "Of course. This won't take long. Then, you will be mostly free to do whatever you want when we introduce you to the Underground Railway," Gray stated. "You'll see what I mean in time. Follow me." "See you later," Rachna waved his hand at the three who replied with a curt nod. Alan then followed Gray's directions and separated from Nix and Flavia who went for the Wiccan Guild's room. When Rachna took a step on the second floor of the pavilion, he was mildly surprised by how quiet and empty it was. What the stairs led to was a spacious lounge room with sofas and even what appeared to be a TV on the wall. "Are you wondering why the place is so vacant?" Gray asked as if he knew what he was thinking. "Yes. How come there isn't anyone here although there were so many people going up and down the stairs?" Rachna inquired as the two continued to walk toward an open corridor. "Well, the pavilion is quite special. It is a place filled with what we called filter dimensions. First of all, when you enter the building, it will separate hosts and even locals from anyone that they don't know or have never interacted with before. Have you ever played an RPG? You can see it as a sort of lobby." "I see. What about the second floor then? What kind of filter is there in place?" "Guild, friend, and party filter. People that don't have any of these in common can't enter the second floor together. You and I can because we're in the same guild, obviously. And, if we consider how small our guild is, you can guess why this lobby is so empty." "This is more thought out than I expected," Rachna remarked as they passed by several doors with plates saying things such as Training Area 2, Vault, Personal Area, etc. "Yes, I'm sure you noticed that the system is quite thorough from many aspects. Well, while we get to the awakening room, let me explain to you a few things you can do in the pavilion. Back to the beginning, when you take the stairs to the right, where your friends went, you're led to a place that serves as a sort of hub with no second filter dimension. There are meeting rooms there for guilds, leisure lounges, the venue, as well as access to board quests, something we'll get to later. Then, there's the left staircase, what we just used. What you have access to here is a lot of things. There's the vault, where you can store items and money if you want, since you do have a limit to how many tallies you can have at once. Pets and mounts can also be left to the vault, where they'll be taken care of in another dimension for a fee. After that, we have the training areas composed of stuff like gyms, arenas, gravity rooms, etc. In the same kind of spirit, there's what we call personal areas. It's generally used by hosts who want to train alone and be protected from any sort of spying. I swear on my hat that nothing could even intrude that room once you're in. Not even the guy sitting at the top of the rankings. Then, we have the guild shop. There's not really a point in you going there for now, since you need a special currency that is only obtainable by doing guild quests or raids, he said and mused for a moment. That's the gist of it, I think, he concluded, then turned to the right as they reached the end of the corridor. The only things left to tell you about are these, he said as he pointed at two double doors facing each other in front of them. He pointed to the right, this one leads to the main shop. It's where you went after the initiation. The other door is what we're here for, the awakening room. Ragna glanced at the doors of the shop and thought of something. Hey, does the shopkeeper stay the same as the initiations? No, usually not, since most of the initiation's shopkeepers are hosts from higher plateaus needing to do it in order to complete their trials. Those even include things like keeping the shop for new hosts. Yes, trials are very varied, honestly, Gray shrugged. Why are you asking that question anyway? He asked, then displayed an even wider red grin. Do you have a crush on the lady of the nine-tailed clan's fox branch? She was your shopkeeper, wasn't she? I heard she was a stunning woman. Did she get through you? Shut up, clown, Ragna replied indifferently as they stood in front of the awakening room. Hurry up and open this. Gray chuckled and simply tapped on the door with his finger. The doors instantly slammed open as if pushed by an invisible force. Ragna inspected the room as he entered after Gray. It was quite small compared to all of what he had seen in the pavilion. The walls were dark gray, the lighting was dim, the ground covered in carpet, and the ceiling was dark blue in color. It felt very confined overall, and the only thing present in the room was an orb hovering above the ground in the center. Well then, it is time, Gray said as he closed the doors behind them. The room was now drowned in darkness, and the only source of light was the faint glow coming from the orb. All you have to do is simple. Touch the orb and channel your mana into it. If you focus, you should be able to feel your mana going through. No need to explain. I already have mana control, Ragna interrupted him. Oh, Gray exclaimed. Guess I should have expected that. In that case, go ahead. The magic that will resonate with your very existence and carry you through countless battles from now on will be uncovered here, he declared, then stepped back to the corner of the room. Ragna breathed in and placed his hand on the orb. He closed his eyes and slowly guided his mana inside of it. The effect was immediate. The orb started shining and the room's very atmosphere became heavy. The ceiling lit up with hundreds of small blue dots, and Gray felt a shiver coursing through his body. His eyes became wide in shock as he watched what was happening. The ceiling and the walls were continuing to light up with dots of cold blue light. Then, these same dots were all suddenly linked together by lines like constellations before something manifested itself above the orb along with a wave of cold air. Ice. No, this is, Gray muttered. Then he got a proper look at what had just appeared above the awakening orb. He first let out a chuckle, then a few more, and finished with a laugh. Ha ha ha, honestly, he smirked. You really have talent to spare, don't you? Chapter 44. A Magical Myth. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the most reclusive corners of the cosmos, there is said to exist stars beyond the understanding of even gods. To this day, only two have ever been observed. The first is called the volcanic star. It burns hotter than the normal fiery stars, with a shade of red more vivid than blood, and the arcs of plasma raging on its surface are said to be able to overheat space itself. The second one is the rarest and most unconventional of all. When coming to the awakening room, Gray never expected even for a second that this would be the day he would see it. There were so many elements that one could awaken. Fire, water, wind, earth, ice, lightning, metal, wood, space, time, life, death, darkness, light, blood, neutral, mind, creation, destruction, dark light, ether. Gray had seen so many of them. One would be shocked to learn how many concepts could be turned into a magic element. That's why, never in his mind, had he anticipated to see an element that was said to exist but had never emerged in the entire history of the system. His cybernetic eyes couldn't help but stare at the spherical condensation of energy floating in front of Rachna. A literal star burning with utmost fervor. But the chills he felt, the freezing mist, and the frost on the floor reminded him, it didn't burn hot, it burned cold. A blue sun releasing the antithesis of flames, arcs of pure ethereal coldness. Congratulations! You have awaked the Tier 0 magic, one of the only two-star magics known to the apprehensible existence, Cold Star Magic. Cold Star Magic, LV.1. This azure star is the embodiment of coldness. Mistaking it for mere ice would be the height of foolishness. A cold star will burn you to the bone and shatter you from the inside. Heat burns. Cold burns too. There are only but a few differences. One incinerates you, the other shatters you. One is merciful, the other is crueler than death. Heat will erase you without mercy, cold will make you perish in agony for eternity. A cold star user cannot feel cold or hot and can absorb cold-related magics to a reasonable degree depending on the skill's level. You can now control the dominance of the cold star to a certain extent. Note: magic is a tortuous path of experimentation. Self-discovery, luck, imagination, wisdom, willpower will be the key to wield its true might. Currently known spells. Cold Star Manifestation, T.0. Rachna ignored the window in favor of the blue star in front of him. His eyes were wide in shock and amazement. For some reason, the cold didn't affect him. It even felt welcoming. He slowly reached for the star, and the second he touched it, the cold in the room disappeared and the lights on the walls died down. The star itself shrunk and flew in circles around Rachna before entering his chest and disappearing. At the same time, he abruptly felt both his heart, his mana, and even his soul core swirl. His fangs grew and he let out a primal snarl. Pronos jumped away in surprise as he felt a small shockwave coming from his friend's body. Gray flinched a bit and was about to rush to examine him. He, after all, had no idea of what star magic would do to its awakener. For all he knew, Rachna might have been dying because his body wasn't strong enough to contain it. But what stopped him was the change in the boy's wolf features. The very tip of his ears and tails gradually blanched before turning wholly white. The extent of the change wasn't too noticeable, but it was still there. Harem. When it was over, Rachna staggered backward before catching himself with the help of Pronos, who had managed to jump and push his back so he would not fall. Rachna shook his head, and for a very brief second, Gray was sure he saw a burning blue star in the place of his pupils. The teen in question, however, knew what was happening in more detail as he read the information on a second window that had appeared. Your 9-tailed blood has been stimulated. Your attributes have been corrected by the blood within you. Intelligence 4. 8. Your mana has been successfully molded into Cold Star Mana. You will now deal an additional 10% of ice damage every time you attack. Every single skill of yours will also be imbued with cold energy. Due to your blood, you have awakened Mystic Cold Star Magic. Mystic Magic is the noble hereditary skill of the 9-tailed clan. By tripling your mana consumption, you will be able to double magic damage. Ragnar breathed in and out and caught a glimpse of the whitened tips of his tails before trying to channel his mana toward his hands, along with his soul core passively assisting him. His entire arm began to release cold mist and a thin layer of frost covered his palm and fingers. It didn't feel any cold as he expected, nor did it seem to be harming him. Well, I'll be damned. The clown's voice pulled him out of his thoughts. The mist dispersed and the frost melted without leaving water on his hand. Ragnar then looked at Gray, who was clapping. Let me recap a bit, he said before clearing his throat. You're a werewolf. You have 9-tailed blood. You have incredible instinct and fighting proficiency. You learn to channel mana on your own. You probably have a nirvana skill. I saw you pull a red utility item. And now, you're telling me that you have awakened a myth-like magic element. The clown nodded exaggeratedly as he held his chin in his hand. Hm. We have a monster in our ranks. It's really good to know that I decided to be an overseer this year, he said, and whirled his cane before pointing it at his new recruit. You, sir, are a monster of nature, he deadpanned. Ragnar rolled his eyes. I'll take that as a compliment. Whatever you say, Gray snorted. Well, this only leaves your little friend there, he added while pointing at Pronos. The albino snake tilted his head while pointing at himself with his tail. Yes, you. Do the same as your friend. Touch the orb and channel your mana. Now, you might not be able to do it in contrary to your master. So, to control your mana, you have to. Before Gray could finish, Pronos was already on top of the orb, pumping mana into it as it shined brightly with a golden light blended with a green one. The robotic clown could only change what his mouth displaced to a very jagged white line. He mechanically looked back and forth between the orb and the little snake and grunted. Golden and green. And this feeling. Eternity and poison. He mumbled. No fucking way. Hey, Ragnar, what is your pet's path? Ouroboros. Gray finally gave out and groaned with a static sound. I can't believe it. That's even worse. It's not eternity, it's a legendary path that gives affinity to infinity magic, he grumbled to himself and opened the guild chat. Clown has joined. Hey, anyone here? Yes. Ah, perfect. You have blood magic. Yes. That's not new. What are you getting at? You're trash. Do you people have death wishes lately? Do you want to die, Gray? No, I just wanted to insult someone. Thank you. I feel better now. Clown has left. What have I just witnessed? That's what I'd like to fucking know. Gray sighed contently. My mind is refreshed, he said with a revitalized grin toward the pair in front of him. Pronos had already finished awakening and was back on Ragnar's shoulder. Now, shall we go? You can pass by the shop if you want, and then I'll lead you to the underground station so we can head out in the wilderness. You'll reunite with your friends there. Ragnar nodded. Sure. Give me a moment to read this, he said while inspecting Pronos' magic. Poison magic, LV.1. A simple but deadly bane for all beings. Poison can come in many different ways and their threat is all but small. Energy poisons, organic poisons, parasites, acids, viruses, fogs, mutations. All can be done with poison magic, and if well used, could even harm the most resilient of beings. Even non-corporeal beings can be hurt if the correct poisons are used. The host can manipulate toxic substances to a certain extent. Currently known spells. Non-infinity magic, LV.1. The power of infinity is hard to grasp. It was first wielded by the Ouroboros during the dawn of time. Only those acknowledged by the coiling serpent have the chance to awaken infinity magic. This magic is considered one of the lost crafts. Nowadays, scarcely anyone has the required knowledge to properly make use of it. But it was once said that mastering infinity meant mastering the laws of numbers. Use unknown spells. None note. This is a magic that cannot be easily delved upon. Only extensive research and patience will grant you control over its power. Looks like you got stuck with a pretty complex ability, little guy, Rachna commented, and Pronos slowly nodded, not understanding a thing about how he should approach infinity magic. When that was done, the two of them left the awakening room along with Gray, who closed the doors right after they were out. All right, you can open those doors if you want to visit the shop, the clown pointed at the doors on the other side of the corridor. I'm not allowed to come with you, by the way. I will wait here. Got it, Rachna nodded. He put his hand on the doorknob and opened one of the doors. The instant he did that, he felt Gray's presence disappear. What lay on the other side of the double door was very different from what he expected. Compared to his last visit to the shop, it was considerably smaller, and it actually looked like a proper shop instead of a maze of random aisles. In fact, it felt like a homely antique shop. The walls, floor, and ceiling were all made with a type of dark wood. There was a red carpet in the middle of the room and a fireplace to the left. Other than that, at least 10 different clocks were hanging on the walls for some reason, along with several paintings and a few weapons meant for decoration. There was some furniture that served as stands for items of all kinds. After taking in all of that, Rachna finally directed his eyes at the mischievous grin of a certain vixen sitting behind the counter. Welcome to my humble shop, Wolfie. Chapter 45. Abyss. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The door closed behind Rachna as he stepped inside the shop. He hummed as he walked to the counter and sat on one of the wooden stools. What? You're not going to say how happy you are to see me? Kalith said as she leaned toward him with her elbows on the counter and her head resting on her hands. For now, you're on a probation period. So, no, Rachna blankly replied. Huh. Probation period. She scrunched her brows in confusion. What do you mean? Gray told me shopkeepers aren't supposed to be the same. So, that begs the question, is this a coincidence or are you a stalker? Kalith almost face planted on the counter. She sighed and straightened her back as she crossed her arms under her chest. You know. I don't know why I hoped for even a second that your first attitude toward me was just a mood. Rachna grunted and Pronos jumped on his head and happily waved his tail at her. See. At least, one of you is grateful, she huffed, then pointed at Rachna's ears. By the way, Wolfie, what happened to your ears? The tips are white. Did you dye them? Rachna reflexively looked up, although he couldn't look at his ears, and shrugged. It happened after I awakened my magic. The same thing happened to my tails. Kalith nodded slowly. I see. Wait, did you just say tails? Plural. She speedily looked over the counter and forced Rachna to lean back unless they headbutt. Her eyes widened as she saw the two black tails with white tips flailing around behind him. No way. This would mean that you're a pure blood, she muttered and backed away again. She sent him a piercing stare. Are you hiding something from me? Rachna had the decency to not laugh at her, spiritually at least. Foxy, that is the wrong question. All right then, pray tell, what is the good question? The better question would be, how many things am I hiding from you? Kalith glared at him and he countered with an expressionless face. They continued the stare off for a while, with Pronos looking back and forth at each of them. In the end, Kalith relented with a groan and casually sat on the counter, purposefully giving him a view of her body, to which Rachna only reacted with a twitch to his eye. I guess it can't be helped. A bit like overseers, I'm not allowed to look into your status. So. What do you want to buy this time? 3 health potions like the ones I bought last time, along with a dozen compact explosives of your recommendation, Rachna said without missing a beat. She nodded and snapped her fingers. Sylvie will bring what you want in a moment. Also, I'd like to ask why the hell didn't you tell me potions took time to properly work? Kalith cocked her head to the side. Well, because you didn't ask. Rachna fell silent. He could only blame himself in the end. When he decided to use self-harm to bring out his other self, he thought that a potion would be enough to heal him after his fall. But after drinking it, he noticed it wouldn't heal him fast enough, thus forcing him to use one of the heart cards. More importantly, why don't you tell me about your path and magic? She changed the subject with perceivable excitement. Why would I? Oh, come on. It's one of the little things I like to do. It's nice to hear about the many different paths and magic new hosts unlock, she said. It's like a fun guessing game, you know. I see, Rachna nodded, almost making her think he would accept. I'm not telling you mine though, just to crush her hopes. She cooed in disappointment and let herself lie down on the counter in front of him. He frowned at her obvious try to get a rouse out of him. She stayed still with a pout as he looked at the ceiling with her tails waving around, Rachna dodging a few of them as they almost hit his head. Then, an idea struck her and she smirked as she faced him. Do you like the ring I gave you? Rachna immediately understood her intention and cringed internally. I do. Then, do it in exchange for it, she followed up. You're not going to tell me that you're shameless enough to not repay me a bit, right? You're the shameless one here, after explicitly affirming that you would give it to me for free, he retorted and she chuckled. Well, I'm a fox, remember. Her smirk widened as he rolled his eyes. Come on, now. Maybe I can give you some advice about your path or magic. Or maybe your friends. Rachna scowled at her. You can't do anything about my path nor my magic. One of them is unique and the other apparently has never been seen before. Kalith widened her eyes as she sat up. She uttered while looking at him. Interesting. I can understand a unique path honestly. But there aren't many new magic elements appearing nowadays. In fact, the last time it happened was almost 500 years ago from what I heard. It's not a new one, per se. It's one that existed but has never been awakened before, Rachna said. He had no idea if this was enough to narrow it down to star magic, but he didn't really care. As much as he liked messing around with this vixen, she didn't seem that untrustworthy that he would not even give her a hint. I see, you're not going to go in detail, are you? She said, half amused, half infuriated. Well, I could tell you about my friends' paths, if you want. That is if you truly have some useful advice for them, he proposed. I don't know about their magic yet, though. Ask away, she waved her hand as she finally got off the counter, to which Rachna was silently relieved. No matter how broken he was, it was still quite hard for him to control hormones so that they would be inexistent. He could only suppress them, and that was already more annoying than letting them out if it went on for too long. One of them has the Chaos Witch path, he decided to tell Flavia's path first. Chaos Witch, huh? She rubbed her chin. Interesting. A Chaos Witch has considerable potential for multi-elemental casting. Usually, a woman that unlocks that path will have at least a triple magic affinity. What is that friend's potential value? Rachna curtly replied. She really did appear to give it considerable thought. Does she have a nirvana skill? Yes. Telekinesis. Kalith whistled. What about her guild? Wiccan. Wow, that girl can go far, she stated. Let's see, something that the Wiccan guild won't already tell her. Okay, relay this to your friend. On the 13th plateau, there is a dungeon called Marie's Tomb. There's a hidden quest there that might help her a lot. The conditions to unlock that quest is to head in alone and to have a mage class path. She also needs to be above level 50 but lower than 60. That's simple. Rachna raised an eyebrow. It sounds like something anyone would know. Well, the thing is that Marie's tomb is filled with enemies that resist magic damage. That's why the conditions for that quest are hard to fulfill and are not well known. However, with telekinesis, she should be fine. I see. I'll tell her then. Thank you. Kaleth smiled brightly. You're welcome, you're welcome. Now, do you have others? She asked with an endearing excitement in her voice. Rachna snorted and continued, this time, it's an epic path, Abyss Monk. What? The vixen's expression did a 180 degrees. Did you just say Abyss Monk? Did I hear that right? Yes. Rachna tilted his head at her sudden seriousness. I don't want to worry you, Wolfie. But Abyss-type paths are dangerous, she uttered. How so? Remember what I told you about cursed skills? Yes. Well, Abyss paths are generally considered cursed paths. They are powerful indeed, but the only reason why they are not classified legendary is because of their twisted nature. Rachna's expression darkened. Will he slowly lose himself? Kaleth shook her head. Not exactly. It's a bit different from your ireful shell. The Abyss won't do something such as encroaching his mind as he takes damage. It will be a constant risk. Honestly, Wolfie, there's only one piece of advice I can give you, keep an eye on your friend. In the future, there is a chance he might not only go mad but also, what? Turn into a creature of the Abyss, she said with a dark tone. What does that mean exactly? Rachna asked again. Without his knowing, his eyes were gradually reddening and the air around him became colder. Kaleth noted both things but didn't comment on them. Do you know what a vampire is? The unexpected answer allowed Rachna to calm down. Vampires. Are you insinuating he would become one? Something similar, yes, she nodded. Creatures of the Abyss count in their ranks beings such thralls, ghouls, vampires, wendigos, and many others. Frankly, vampire is the best you could hope for if you ever become an Abyss creature. The blood craving is a pain to deal with but not irremediable. However, monsters like ghouls need flesh to live. Is there a way to stop it from happening? Well, Kaleth pondered. There is, one thing you could try. On the 125th plateau, the Undead Legion might be able to give you a last measure solution. Though it won't erase the Abyss effect, it will allow your friend to have some sort of control over his eventual transformation. That's the best I can tell you. I'll try to find more information on my own if you want. I'll appreciate that if you do, Rachna said with a heavy tone. At the same time, Sylvie, the small fox pet, came from the back of the shop and jumped on the counter with 2 boxes balanced on her tails. Kaleth sighed in relief as the dark atmosphere was broken and opened the 2 boxes like last time, showing one with the health potions inside and another with 15 thin silver discs as big as a palm. These discs are a type of grenade. There's a button on the back. Press on it once and it'll explode at impact after throwing it. Press it twice and it'll be set on a 6-second timer. Press it thrice and it'll be disarmed. It'll be 1100 tallies for everything here. Rachna nodded as he put everything in his spatial ring after a system window confirmed the payment. Kaleth smiled bitterly at the sour note that this conversation ended in and looked at Pronos, who was seen to be browsing the shop on his own if his concentrated look was anything to go by. What about this little guy's path? She asked, wanting to change the mood. Ouroboros, Rachna responded simply and she froze. Of course, she mumbled. Well, can't help much for this one. He should have unlocked infinity magic too, right? I'm not privy about anything relating to it, but one thing I know is that a decently strong serpent local resides on the 148th plateau. You might obtain something worthwhile from him. Rachna grunted positively. Thank you for your help. Really, he said with an almost friendly tone. I have to say, you changed my opinion. I'm happy that you're my shopkeeper. Caliph was taken by surprise by his sudden compliment. Though, it was said with that same monotonous voice of his. Otherwise, she might have graced him with a blush. Instead, she settled with a soft smile. No problem. I guess I'm not on probation anymore, eh? She grinned. Rachna nodded while feeling a bit amused. I suppose so, he said, then looked at Pronos. Did you find something useful, little guy? The little snake seemed to sigh as he shook his head. He closed the system window with a wave of his tail and recovered his place under Sonata. In that case, I'll be going now. Gray is waiting outside, Rachna said and stood up. Gray whistles, huh? So, you joined the Throne of Glory. Can't say it's a bad choice, but be careful, they're a powerful bunch for sure, but they tend to get in trouble, she remarked, and he shrugged. I'm a living trouble from what I hear, he said, which puzzled her. He snorted. Maybe I'll tell you one day, Foxy. For now, it's too fun to see you be shocked at everything I do. Caliph harumphed. Cheeky brat. All in good fun. He waved her goodbye as he went back to the door of the shop. See you, Foxy. Thanks again. Sure, survive well, Wolfie, she huffed while smiling, and he proceeded to leave the shop. Chapter 46. Black Steel Spear. You are listening at novelfull.audio. You took your time in there, Gray said as he made his way down to the first floor of the pavilion with Rachna. You were bargaining or something? Not really, Rachna replied blandly as they went down the staircase. What do you know about abyss paths? Abyss paths? The clown frowned. Where did you hear about those? You don't have one, do you? No, Alan has one. Gray exclaimed with a hand on his chin. After reaching the bottom of the stairs, they parked on one side of the hall and he continued, well, I do know a bit about it. The abyss paths are quite infamous in the higher plateaus. There's even an abyss guild, in fact. Though, they're branded as an evil one. Was this what you talked about with your shopkeep? Rachna nodded and he hummed, how rare. A shopkeeper that knows about these kinds of things must at least be above the 500th plateau. Who was it? Foxy, Rachna replied without thinking. Who? Oh. I meant Caliph Yakshasa. Gray's thought process creaked for a few seconds. Damn, kid. You move fast. Not only do you call her Foxy, but she apparently even exercised her connections to be your personal shopkeep. Rachna shrugged indifferently as they watched the people pass by while leaning against the wall. Well, that aside, back to the abyss thing. If you talked about it with that woman, you should have a pretty clear idea of what it is. So, what do you want to know? Any idea how to help Alan? No, I'm sorry. But he did join the Madness Guild, right? If I had known his path beforehand, I still would have sent him to Quill. That guy's guild name isn't just for show. They're used to deal with berserkers, for the lack of a better word. That's the best I can say. I see, Rachna closed his eyes and a minute later, he opened them again as he finally realized something. What are we waiting for, by the way? Well, the other guilds, of course. And your friends. It's better to go together, Gray replied while fiddling with his cane. How long will that be? I don't know. 30 minutes. An hour. Since I only have you, it's fast. But the other guilds have several people to guide and awaken. So, we wait for them. Asterisk 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 40 minutes later, Rachna was mentally playing Tetris with his HL when he heard someone call his name, Rack. He looked up to see Alan walking in his direction together with around 10 other new hosts on top of Quill Phrasen. Well, if it isn't little Quill, Gray quipped as they got close. Whizzles, the man greeted curtly and glanced at Rachna. This is the S+. Worth your participation this year. Worth. Gray cackled. The kid's probably worthy of being a VIP for the first guild. How could I be disappointed, honestly? Quill lifted his eyebrows but stayed silent otherwise. So, is your guild going on ahead or are you waiting for others? Gray followed up. I'll wait for the Wiccans. We agreed that we would go together, Quill stated. Oh. Nice, 3 of the top 100 guilds cooperating for their new recruits training. It will be a fresh experience. Quill nodded and waved at the hosts following him. Relax. We will wait for a little more and then head to the station with the Wiccans and the clown. The new hosts nodded silently and made sure to stand somewhere where they wouldn't bother anyone passing by. Rachna inspected them for a short moment. There wasn't a lot of them, all things considered. 14, all in all. But, one thing he noticed was that other than Alan, all of them seemed to be cold. They all held this empty expression as if their life had been robbed from them in the nastiest way imaginable. Is it this guild's preference? He thought to himself, then faced his friend. Hey, Alan. What? You told them about your path, right? Oh, Alan seemed to understand something. He scratched his head and sighed. I guess that means you learned what it means. Yeah, I told them about it. Quill asked me about it when I told him I was recommended by the clown. He looked surprised for a second but then he accepted and explained to me what Abyss is usually associated with. You're okay with it? Rachna asked with his usual countenance, and anyone who didn't know him would have mistakenly assumed that he didn't care. I'm fine, Alan shrugged. It adds to the thrill, you know. It sounds fun to try and not to give in to darkness or whatever, he said while laughing. That's one way of looking at it, Gray commented from the side. I like it though. You won't survive long in here if you can't find at least a bit of enjoyment in your difficulties. Surprisingly deep from a cyborg that dresses like a clown, Alan retorted, and Gray cackled. At the same time a feminine voice reached them, well, it seems we're last to arrive. Everyone looked to the right where the end of the staircase was and saw Vera approaching them with exactly 8 recruits behind her. All of them were women and 2 of them were Nyx and Flavia. Ah, Vera. Good morning, Gray tipped his hat. How are your recruits this time around? Fantastic, actually, she grinned and started hugging Flavia who was next to her. This little girl here has so much talent I'm practically drooling. Please. Lady Vera, let me go, Flavia said weakly as Vera rubbed her face against hers. The other women seemed to be smiling at the scene. Really? How talented are we talking about? Sextuple affinity, Vera said almost too smugly, but going by the reactions Gray and Quill showed, it wasn't without the right incentive. And the lovely Nyx over here, she then started hugging the former goddess as well. Has awakened eternal night and lunar magic. Well, shit, Gray uttered. Maybe I should have broken that damn unspoken rule. Thank God you didn't, she huffed. How did you get so lucky with your group anyway? Gray shrugged with a smirk. I guess I'm just that awesome. Silence was all he got. Really? At least, try and refute it instead of closing your mouths like that, he grumbled. Let's go. We've wasted enough as it is, Quill declared unbothered and started walking toward the exit of the pavilion. See? I told you he was grumpy, Gray muttered to Rachna as they followed him with the rest. As the sizable group left the pavilion and pierced through the crowd outside, the new recruits of the Wiccan Guild quickly surrounded Rachna in curiosity. They started fawning over him while barraging him with questions. What's your name? How did you get those ears and tails? That little snake is so cute. Are you a werewolf? Rachna retained his stony fa.ade, but the way his eyes were twitching wasn't a good sign about his current mood. Pronos had also retreated under Sonata at lightning speed. Rachna raised his hand to stop them from speaking further. If you want to bother someone, go for Alan. Not me. Hey. Alan shouted in consternation. Ah, come on. At least tell us your name. One of the girls said. Ragna Ziora, he said as he felt that answering their questions would take less energy than arguing with them. Can I pet you? One other girl raised her hand as if she was asking permission from a teacher. No. Can I touch your tails? No. Can I? No, he didn't even wait for the next question before giving his answer. Flavia watched on with a wry smile while Nyx let out a quiet chuckle. Vera's giggles sounded and everyone looked at her. Come on now, girls. Let the poor boy go. Fine, the girls complied with pouts and Ragna grunted. He threw a look at the beautiful woman who was smiling at him. Do you overseers have anything to gain by sticking to profile stereotypes like this? Era. Vera tilted her head with an impish smile. Whatever do you mean? Not only did you choose a bunch of women, but all their personalities are also too outgoing to be a coincidence. There's also the people behind that guy, he replied while pointing at Quill's group leading on ahead of them, far enough that they wouldn't be able to hear their conversation. Too broken. Shells of human beings, something that I guess must be a recurrent thing every year, and that man willfully picked them. They, who must have lost things like lovers or siblings or perhaps seen too many exposed guts for their untrained minds. Vera smiled sadly at his words. Not as broken as you, I'd say. He huffed and didn't even bother to humor her with a comeback. Well, you're correct. The Wiccan Guild is a witch clan of sorts, and witches, on top of being exclusively women, need to know how to let their desires and emotions free. They should always be outgoing, genial, and sociable. Thus, it is but natural to pick people matching these traits. Of course, there are exceptions. Your two lady friends here are a lot more reserved but still have tremendous potential. Indeed, Gray nodded in agreement. Guilds need to keep a sort of decorum regarding their image and reputation. The Throne of Glory, for instance, only accepts powerful people, but what you don't know is that all of us are for the most part very independent. All of us hate being ordered. This is why we joined a guild that would let us stand as equals. That is also why we're not numerous. Then, there's Quill's Guild, Vera continued. The Madness Guild is a gloomy one. They are a group that welcomes mostly people that are unafraid of pain or death. The majority of them also have incredible physical capabilities, and their extremely cold attitude makes them terrifyingly calculative in combat. Damn. I'm starting to regret joining this guild, Alan muttered. I'm not sure I can cope. True, Ragna nodded knowingly. There's absolutely no way you can be calculative in a fight. Alan let out comical tears. Rock. Can you stop calling me stupid on every occasion? I'm not calling you stupid. I'm calling you an idiot. That's the same thing. Gray laughed at their small banter. As much as I'm enjoying the small chat, I have to interrupt you there. We've arrived, he said as he pointed forward with his cane. Everyone looked at Quill's group, who had taken a decent head start, going down a staircase to the side of the street that anyone would be able to compare to the entrance of an underground metro station. Vera and Quill led their group down the stairs until they were about 20 meters underground, and a spacious place welcomed them. For being underground, the ceiling was quite high and the lighting felt very natural. Several people were sitting on the benches there, seemingly waiting for the transport that would probably be coming on the large rails they could see on each side of the station. Let's see, Gray hummed, and he looked at the time on his pocket watch. It should arrive at any time now. The Black Steel Spear is never late. Black Steel Spear. Alan reiterated. Sounds grand. By the way, why are these rails so big? True to his words, the rails they could see were a lot larger than anything they were used to back on Earth. Before Gray could answer, the echoing sound of a locomotive reached their ears through the tunnels. The clown grinned, well, see for yourself. Barely half a minute later, the new hosts jerked back in surprise as a massive red train with 2 floors reached the station at high speed. It zoomed by in the tunnel to their right and disappeared inside again. But the sound didn't disappear, and it soon came back from the other side before slowing down with the loud sound of the steam being discharged and the grinding of the rails against the train's wheels. When it stopped, Rachna observed the train again. At first sight, it looked like something that was too old for a city as advanced as black steel, but the way the doors smoothly opened as well as the seemingly clean and modern interior forced Rachna to admit that this train was more than it met the eye. Though, as they all began to enter the rail transport, he couldn't help the small roguish instinct he had gained from his uncle as he opened his mouth. "Are you sure we don't need a wand and pointy hats before going in?" That day, Gray was sure that he hadn't laughed harder in years. Chapter 47. Wilderness. You are listening at novelfull.audio. So, eternal night, huh? Rachna inquired as his group sat in one of the private rooms of the train along with Gray. The other 2 guilds had been scattered in other compartments. Yes, Nyx nodded impassively. She raised her hand and a black arc of jagged shadows appeared surrounded by a swirl of dark lightning. This is Eater. A perfect combination of both unmatchable power and subtlety, or so they said, she added and closed her hand to make it disappear. Gray hummed. You should be careful with that magic in the future. Why? That is the signature of the eternal night god. After his emergence a few years ago, many people were forced to acknowledge that he was the strongest god to ever exist. Parading its power will do you more bad than good. You'd become a target of attention. The implications of that are a no-brainer. Nyx scowled at that. Again. The system already told me that man had become the eternal night god. But the strongest. What happened after our battle? Was I sent into the future? She thought to herself, and Rachna glanced at her. Hey, clown, seeing that you were not that shocked when Vera mentioned that element, I assume there are more wielders of that magic within the system, correct? He asked. Gray nodded. You're right. But, in my opinion, I feel like they are different from your friend here. I met other wielders of this magic, but all of them seem to be lacking in comparison. Their magic was undeniably Eater, there's no doubt about that, but its substance was weak, he said and looked at Nyx. Yours, however, feels complete. As if you had something the others don't. Well, perhaps it's because of the small divinity you exude, he added with a shrug. When Rachna realized that this conversation wouldn't be going much farther, he decided to change the topic. What about lunar magic? Oh, that, Gray raised a finger. It's not super rare. But it's as it sounds, magic made to use the power of the moon, he explained. Well, that's vague, I know. But you'll probably understand in time. Well then, if we're going to go through everyone's magic affinities, what is yours? He turned toward Alan in curiosity. Every host out there loves to hear about others' awakenings. So, Foxy isn't the only one, Rachna commented inwardly and also looked at Alan, waiting for his answer. Well, I only have one affinity, void. What? Gray uttered dumbly. Could you repeat that? I fear my sound sensors misfunctioned for a second. You. Void. The clown grumbled inaudibly before crossing his arms and leaning back against his seat. Damn, that quill didn't even bother to brag about it, huh? What is the void element? Flavia asked in confusion. Another super rare affinity. I swear you 4 are so busted, he said sardonically. Anyway, void is the element of nothingness, suiting for the Madness Guild now that I think about it. Simply said, it's a magic mainly meant to replicate magic. Replicate magic. Or I guess it's more accurate to say that it incorporates magic, Gray specified and waved his hand at Alan. Why don't you explain it yourself? It's your affinity, after all. Alan mused for a moment. Well, from what I understood, I can assimilate the element of a magic that is used against me and copy it, albeit weaker. I can't have two different elements at the same time though. At least, for now. So, if I were to cast my magic on you, you'd be able to use it as well? Rachna asked. Would it hurt you when you assimilate it? Yeah, Alan stretched his cheek. I need to be hit to assimilate one and it can kill me if I'm not careful. But it also says I can do the same with pure magical energy. So, in other words, I could do the same by touching someone. Interesting. Can you do it on me? Rachna requested. I can try, Alan said and put his hand on his friend's shoulder before closing his eyes. Gray squinted his cybernetic eyes in curiosity. Then, Alan's hand started collecting frost and releasing a chilling mist. After a few seconds, he winced and hastily pulled his arm back. What's wrong? Flavia asked as he saw him clench his hand. Well. I think it failed. Give me a second, he muttered and seemingly looked at a system window. Apparently, your magic cannot be replicated, Rack. Gray chuckled. Obviously. Star magic isn't something that could be so easily reproduced. Star magic. And, wait. Why didn't you tell me before I tried then? Alan shouted and the clown shrugged uncaringly. I was curious. It's not like it was going to kill you. Alan groaned while Nix got interested in something else. You said star magic. Yes. Rachna over here has awakened cold star magic. Something that was only known in theory until today. Though, keep it a secret from your respective guilds. I'm confident that my guild can stand against most hostilities, but we really don't want to attract more trouble than necessary. I already made a huge gamble by accepting Rachna and his irregularity. I bet, Alan snorted. So, what is this cold star magic thing? For now, the only thing I know is that I can channel mana to generate cold and that my attacks have 10% additional cold damage. Then, I have a tier 0 spell that I need to try out, Rachna told in Gray's stead. Oh, and it also did this to my ears and tails, he added whilst pointing at the white fur. Yeah, I wondered why it was like that now, Alan nodded understandingly. So, basically, you have super rare magic as well. Add a few more supers and a mega before rare, and then you'll be spot on, Gray jested. On top of that, you should hear about the lazy little snake there, he pointed at Pronos who was as always sleeping the day off. He has two affinities, poison and infinity. Poison I can imagine. But infinity? I never heard about something similar, Nix questioned. Super, etc., mega rare affinity as well, Gray deadpanned. Though less rare than star magic, it's so uncommon and elusive that no one even knows what it can be used for. It will be up for the lazy snake or Rachna himself to find out. But it's nevertheless considered divine magic as it relates to Ouroboros, he disclosed and looked at the time. They were about to arrive. The last one is you, young lady. Vera said you had awakened 6 affinities. What are they? Well, Flavia swiftly brought up the list on her status as she hadn't had enough time to memorize them. Wind, light, gravity, wood, time and space. The room fell silent. Even I can tell that sounds like bullshit, Alan broke the silence. You have no idea, Gray facepalmed. The first 3 ones are frankly quite good. Some people would kill to have those 3 affinities. But wood, time, and space. That's just crazy. These 3 have massive potential individually. But you're saying you have all 3 of them along with 3 others and a nirvana skill. He let out a snicker and shook his head. Busted. Flavia laughed wryly. Thank you. Well, you certainly have promise as a chaos witch. That's for sure. What do you mean? Rachna raised an eyebrow. What exactly makes a chaos witch strong? I can answer that, Flavia said with a smile. My path will eventually allow me to use chaos magic. Contrary to what you may think, it's not an extra affinity but a constructed magic that is made by mixing several others together. Hence, chaos magic. So, logically speaking, the more magics you use to generate chaos, the stronger it will be. Though I heard from Lady Vera that it will be very hard to use 6-fold chaos, as she called it. Really, Gray couldn't help but ask himself how far these 4 would go. Well, 5 counting the unassuming pet that unassumingly had the potential to become a sort of serpent god. Ultimately, even after hearing all that in person, he still couldn't believe a group so talented existed. A few minutes after the end of their chat, a chime ringed throughout the train. Then, immediately after, they heard the doors open along with a synthetic voice. The black steel spear has reached its destination. Please disembark. All righty, Gray stood up and opened the sliding door of their room. Let's go. We've arrived. Alan asked confusedly. I didn't even feel the train stop. And we couldn't feel it move either, Nix pointed out. Of course, Gray said as they walked in a corridor that you wouldn't believe was in a train because of its size. The black steel spear is nothing mundane. Its maximum speed is higher than the speed of sound and it operates with both machinery and magic. You have no idea of the distance we traveled during these 15-odd minutes. Rachna's group quietly followed the clown until they reached one of the automatic doors of the train and the view was nothing short of striking. It was a massive contrast from the city-scape. Tall grass shining under the light of the sun, a stunning variety of flowers, and trees of all sorts with some in the distance being even taller than skyscrapers. But, even more than the beauty of the landscape itself, the more shocking thing was the presence of creatures that Rachna didn't fail to recognize. His eyes widened as he caught sight of one certain creature with a very long neck, eating at the leaves of a tree. Apatosaurus, he muttered unintentionally. Dinosaurs. Alan shouted in shock. Ah, yes. That's how the Earth calls them, isn't it? Gray said as he spotted Vera and Quill's group come out from different doors. They were probably taking time to gather everyone. Well, there will be a few species here that you may know about. But that's only a small part of all the creatures that live on the first plateau or on others' plateaus for that matter. Unbelievable. I never expected this kind of scenery after seeing Black Steel, Flavia whispered. Well, Black Steel's mayor made it a law to not touch nature more than necessary. While it is true that a plateau's surface greatly exceeds most planets, Black Steel has always left it untouched and unpolluted, just expanding the city when needed. Indeed. Black Steel has a good mayor, Vera's voice sounded as the 3 groups got closer after making sure everyone was here. The other passengers of the train were already leaving. Right after that, they heard the train's locomotive roar as a cloud of steam was released. The train slowly started moving again on the rails built on the ground around the grass, and then followed the half-turn defined by those same rails and went back underground through a tunnel. Well then, let's go, Gray grinned. It's time for you to test your mettle on your first trial. Chapter 48. Slimy Fight. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Okay, first of all, let's set up the parties, Gray said and snapped his fingers. Rachna raised an eyebrow at the prompt that followed. Gray Whistles invites you to join his party. Do you accept? Yes/no. Yes, he whispered and a new icon appeared in his field of vision. A quick mental input showed him the current members of the party, which currently were Gray and him. What about you 3? The clown turned toward Flavia, Nix, and Alan. Normally, new recruits would form a party with the guild they joined. But there isn't much good in separating your little group. You're fine with that, right? He looked over Vera and Quill. I don't mind, the beautiful witch shook her head. At least this way I can make a single party instead of 2. I don't mind either, Quill replied simply. Good. Gray smiled and forwarded the invitations to the trio, who accepted without needing much convincing. Now, here's how it's going to go. We overseers will watch you from the rear lines as you head to your first trial, and if the need arises, we will intervene. Question. One of the girls from the Wiccan Guild raised her hand. Where is the trial? Good question, Gray nodded. There are two ways to navigate on a plateau. Dumb luck and map. Everyone looked at the clown weirdly. Vera shook her head with a sigh. Just tell your AI to open your map. Heeding her words, the new hosts mentally prompted their AIs and a system window appeared in front of them, one that they hadn't seen before. Rachna looked closely at the image in front of him. In the center, a red light was flashing and was surrounded by 5 others, though white in color. The window was also obviously depicting their surroundings, with the train's rails being very recognizable. Other than that, the virtual screen had a compass with it and 3 arrowheads were pointing in 3 different directions. The red dot is yourself. The white dots are the members of your party. Quill took over for the explanation. The map will be filled as you explore the plateau. In other words, a location cannot appear on your map if you haven't been there previously. But, the most important thing is the arrows, each one of them points you toward a trial. This is something you'll quickly get used to as it is recurrent on every plateau. However, I have to clarify the clown's words, Vera continued, and Gray chuckled. Dumb luck isn't a bad way of putting. Trials are not the only thing hosts aim for. Dungeons, exploration quests, bounties, world bosses, ruins, treasures. You get it. Many things can be found on a plateau, and hosts tend to explore randomly until they find something of value. I guess that means the system has a reset mechanic. Rachna spoke up, which confused most of the other recruits. Vera smiled. You're sharp. Yes. Every month plateaus are reset and the natural formations on them are randomly regenerated. Dungeons and quests are never located in the same place. Though, it doesn't necessarily mean that the contents themselves change as well. Do you understand? She asked Rachna as well as everyone else at the same time, who simultaneously nodded. Splendid. Now, be on your way, greenhorns, Gray said. I'm sure all of this explaining has bored more than one of you. Head to one of the trials and get wild. We'll be right behind you. Rachna looked at his group and they shrugged at each other before following an arrow that pointed roughly to the north. They were the first ones to move, and getting caught in the initiative, the rest simply went after them without raising any questions. Fortunately, the hosts recruited by Quill were not the type to try to lead in the first place. It applied to Vera's recruits as well. Those future witches were actually giddy to follow. After jogging for a few minutes through the tall grass, passing by a few dinosaurs, which appeared to be peaceful, Rachna sensed something and stopped. He looked at his left, where the beginnings of a forest laid along with very thick bushes. Before anyone behind him could ask why he stopped, the leaves rattled and something emerged before flopping on the ground before them. Really? Alan uttered as they all stared at the thing. I mean, sure, this is game, but come on. This just makes me feel like a mob. The creature in front of them was in fact a big, round, transparent cyan slime. It had bubble dot-like patterns inside of it as well as a very small red stone. Watching from the back, Gray snickered, which was only picked up by Rachna, who glanced at him with a blank look. Don't underestimate slimes, Quill said taciturnly. They are more dangerous than you think. As he spoke, more and more slimes started coming out from the bushes, slowly forming a small army of blobs as they approached the parties. When their number got over 50, some people began to feel apprehensive, and what Quill added afterward didn't help. They are near impervious to physical attacks. If they catch you, you will have trouble escaping its grasp. If you attack without a plan, he was interrupted as 5 slimes were abruptly lifted into the air and slammed against the ground with a force strong enough to make them splatter and die. Quill stood motionlessly with his arms crossed and the new hosts all turned toward Flavia who had her hand extended. Eh? She looked around at the people staring at her. Was I not supposed to attack? Rachna snorted and kicked the ground without a word. Barely anyone was able to see him speed up before he arrived in front of the still increasing army of slimes. He whirled the glaive in his hand that no one had noticed him take out and swung it at 3 slimes. The creatures were split into 2 right in the middle where the small red stone was. At the same time, the 2 sliced surfaces of the slimes first steamed because of Sonata's heat before turning to ice. Without stopping, Rachna stepped forward past the dissolving slimes he killed and grabbed one of the others barehanded. Then, with a short pulse of mana, the entire creature froze before it was shattered with a kick. After getting out of their daze, the others finally decided to join Rachna in fighting the slimes. Nyx breathed out and casually waved her hand. A few shadow spikes impaled a group of slimes in the distance. Among everyone here, her power was probably the most large-scaled. Even if it would take her quite a lot of energy, she was able to take out 100 of these slimes in a few seconds. Meanwhile, Alan tried to punch one of them only for the shock of the blow to be absorbed. He scowled and followed up with a kick. It did send the monster away but it hadn't done any damage. A lot of other physical fighters like him were struggling around him. Of course, none of them were stupid enough to not notice the red stone inside them, but getting to them with fists seemed impossible. That's what Quill meant by near impervious, Alan thought as he fended off more slimes without truly being able to damage them. Magic then. But I still haven't copied any. As he and the others were lost in their thoughts, Rachna spoke up clearly and loudly enough for them all to hear. Scatter force, he said indifferently as he cut apart 2 more slimes with a full spin of his spear. Flavia did kill them by smashing them against the ground. They can take hits because of buoyancy, but it won't work if the forces are spread. Don't rail your fist in. If you can't do it alone, attack 2 opposite sides in pairs. All the while he spoke, his eyes never lost focus on the slimes and their impassiveness. Grabbing them, freezing them, slicing them. He was doing it without even sweating or thinking about it. The other hosts widened their eyes in surprise before following his advice. The members of the Madness Guild attacked the slimes in pairs and their bodies were squished from both sides. They failed to hold together their form before bursting into droplets of water. Witches, Rachna continued, and the girls from the Wiccan Guild perked up. They had been using weapons such as knives to fight against the slimes. They were unable to use magic just yet after coming out of the tutorial. Stop using those. Fall back. Learn your magic. These enemies are weak. This is as good an opportunity as any other. Close your eyes, concentrate and try to feel foreign movement inside your body. Mana is just like a sore limb. Concentrate and force it to move. The girls blinked at each other before also following his orders. It almost felt natural to them as he told them directives one after the other. From afar, Vera tilted her head. Era. How surprising. In contrast with his cold attitude, he has the talent of a leader. It is also amazing that he attained a sufficient understanding of magic to give others advice to control mana. Not even mentioning how easily he freezes those slimes. For some reason, it looks like every attack of his carries ice magic. Indeed, Quill nodded. He also grasped the slime's physical properties in a short moment. He has an uncanny awareness for someone his age. Though, I have to disagree about the leader part. How so? That's not leadership, Gray intervened with a calm, appraising tone. That's commanding. This kid is not leading the others, he's outright telling them how to fight, how to win. He's not speaking for the sake of helping them, he's directing them in order to prevail. It's almost as if I'm looking at a general employing his troops in the most efficient way possible. Although I don't believe it's as bad as him treating them as tools, it's not far from the truth. I agree, Quill squinted his eyes. I've seen others with eyes like his. If it meant surviving or winning, he would probably be willing to go as far as cutting one of his own limbs or even killing an ally without hesitation. Vera frowned. Don't go too far now. You're making it sound like he's a heartless killer. Gray cackled and waved his finger. No, no. He's not a heartless killer. From what I've seen, I think he's got plenty of heart actually, although concealed. No, what we're saying is that he can become a heartless killer at the flip of a switch, he said and rubbed his chin. I'm curious to know who was responsible for his uprising. Back to the recruits group. The girls from the Wiccan Guild, after following Rachna's advice, had all managed to at least feel their mana. Others even had made their mana control skill already. The first of them to launch magic was the unofficial leader of the small female team, Senna. She had brown hair tied into ponytails and brown eyes that flared with magic energy as a fireball shot out from her hand and completely incinerated a slime. Rachna glanced at them and grunted positively. He also took a look at how Pronos was faring with his poison. The little snake was doing his own experiments. He first had used his iron poison like normally and the slime had started glowing before evaporating. Pronos followed by also activating his magic and a green aura surrounded him. His azure eyes gained an emerald pigment and within a few seconds, he had enclosed several slimes with a sort of fog. The monsters quickly turned into the same color as the phenomenon and rapidly began to melt as they died. Other than him, Flavia and Nyx were also testing their magic. Though, their methods were vastly different. The former was openly trying to make gusts of wind and spikes of earth randomly. They were weak compared to what Aquila could do, but it was enough against slimes. As for the former goddess, she was very subtle about it. She was alone to the side and when slimes approached her, they would immediately get swallowed by a maw of shadows while she fiddled with something in her hand, a small sphere of darkness contained in black electricity. Then, there was Alan who sadly couldn't practice his magic which visibly depressed him if the comical dark cloud above his head was anything to go by, even as he pummeled the slimes with his fists. As Rachna observed all of that, his body was moving on both instinct and habit. Because of that, at some point, he realized a bit too late that he was holding the last slime in his hand. The monster had encased his hand in its body and true to Quill's words, it normally would be very hard to get away from it and Rachna could also feel the tinge of pain as if something was actively trying to burn his hand. He huffed and the last slime froze over in a second before it was slammed on the ground. Rachna sighed and a crystallized breath came out of his mouth. His magic had been surprisingly easy to use and also fast. Other than the passive 10% cold damage at every attack, even the ones dealt with Sonata, he only needed to be in contact with a slime and spend a few mana points to freeze it. Granted, those slimes were barely level 5. But it was still a good start in testing his star magic. On top of that, his mana consumption was very low for what he had done. His soul core could even thaw the mana costs by 10%. As for his stamina, it had decreased by 5. He was barely winded. Rachna had no idea how long stamina took to recover or even how exactly its loss was calculated other than from skills, but he knew for a fact that the small amounts of energies he had used in this fight were already coming back to him. That was a nice show, Gray said while clapping, grabbing the attention of everyone. Though we three would have liked all of you to figure things out purely on your own, following directives is something you'll have to learn in the future anyway. So, it's not bad. Now, get a move on. Next destination, the trial. Hooray! The clown stuck his hand in the air only for the hosts to ignore him and turn around. He groaned as put his hand back on his cane. I swear kids these days can't enjoy a bit of comical relief. Vera and Quill didn't comment and walked past him. Really? You two as well? Killjoys, the lots of you, the cyborg grumbled.